The rain began early that evening in Chifeng, a steady curtain of water falling over the narrow streets of Yinchuan district in Inner Mongolia. By the time the clock approached 6, the sky had already darkened into a dull gray haze, the kind of dim light that makes ordinary apartment buildings feel strangely quiet. People hurried along the sidewalks with umbrellas tilted forward against the wind, anxious to get home before the rain intensified. For most residents in the neighborhood, it was an unremarkable weekday evening, the sort that fades into memory almost immediately. But inside one modest apartment building, something had already happened that would soon draw the attention of investigators across the entire city. The building itself was small, a typical low-cost residential complex where most families lived modestly. The hallways were narrow, the walls painted in fading beige that had long since lost its brightness. Outside the entrance, a row of parked scooters and bicycles leaned against the damp concrete wall. Nothing about the place suggested that a violent crime had just taken place inside. In fact, at that moment, almost no one in the building had any idea that anything was wrong. At approximately 6:20 p.m., a young woman arrived at the apartment and stopped outside one of the doors on the second floor. She knocked once, then again, waiting for a response from inside. The only sound that answered her was the faint echo of rain tapping against the building's windows. She knocked again, this time louder, her knuckles striking the door with increasing impatience. Still nothing. Inside the apartment, a landline telephone began to ring. The sharp electronic tone echoed through the small rooms, repeating again and again in the empty space. From outside the door, the young woman could hear it clearly. Someone had to be inside, but no one picked up. After several attempts, the young woman reached for her phone and made another call, this time to her mother. Her mother, Liu Yan, was still at work at a nearby supermarket. It was the evening rush hour, one of the busiest times of the day. Customers were lined up at the checkout counters, impatiently waiting to pay for their groceries before heading home. When Liu Yan answered the phone and heard what her daughter was saying, a quiet sense of unease began to form. Her younger daughter, 13-year-old Xiao Ding, should have been home already. She usually returned from school in the afternoon and stayed in the apartment until the rest of the family returned. But now something felt wrong. Liu Yan quickly asked a coworker to cover her position and hurried out of the supermarket, stepping into the rain as she made her way back to the apartment building. The trip home wasn't long. The hospital nearby was less than 2 kilometers away, and the apartment complex sat just beyond a busy intersection that was familiar to most residents in the neighborhood. Yet during those few minutes, the uneasy feeling growing in her chest refused to disappear. When Liu Yan finally reached the building and unlocked the apartment door, the scene inside stopped her cold. Her younger daughter, Xiao Ding, was lying on the bed in the small bedroom. At first glance, the room looked almost ordinary. The bed sheets were slightly wrinkled, the curtains drawn halfway across the window to block out the gray evening light. But as Liu Yan stepped closer, the details became impossible to ignore. There was blood on the pillow. A dark stain had already spread across the fabric beneath Xiao Ding's head, soaking into the mattress below. The girl's skin had turned pale, her small body completely motionless. Liu Yan rushed forward, calling her daughter's name again and again, shaking her shoulders in desperation. But there was no response, no movement, no breath. The injury was severe. On Xiao Ding's forehead and scalp, there were multiple blunt force wounds, deep enough that the blood had pooled beneath her head. Bruises were visible on her wrists and ankles, dark marks pressed into the skin, as if something had once been tightly wrapped around them. The signs suggested restraint, but whatever had been used to bind her was no longer there. Within minutes, Liu Yan managed to steady herself enough to make a phone call. The first person she contacted was someone she had once trusted more than anyone else, her ex-husband, Wang Bang. Although the two had divorced several months earlier, Wang Bang still remained involved in her life. He often visited, sometimes bringing groceries or small necessities for the household. In many ways, Liu Yan still considered him a reliable presence during difficult moments, and this was certainly one of them. When Wang Bang arrived at the apartment, he immediately called for an ambulance and the police. Because the building was located close to a hospital, emergency responders arrived quickly. But by the time medical personnel examined Xiao Ding, the conclusion was already unavoidable. The girl had died approximately 2 hours earlier. At that moment, the quiet apartment officially became a homicide scene. Police investigators began their initial examination almost immediately. Surprisingly, the room did not display the chaotic signs typically associated with violent attacks. Furniture was still in place. Drawers were closed. Personal belongings appeared undisturbed. If a struggle had taken place, someone had gone to great lengths to conceal it. Yet the forensic details told a different story. The injuries to Xiao Ding's head suggested repeated blows from a large blunt object, something heavy, flat, and solid enough to cause catastrophic cranial trauma. According to early medical assessments, the impact had been powerful enough to fracture part of the skull. But strangely, no weapon could be found inside the apartment. Another detail soon caught the attention of investigators. Near the entrance of the apartment, a mop had been left leaning against the wall in an unusual position. According to Liu Yan, the floor hadn't been cleaned that day. Normally, the mop would have been stored in the bathroom. This small inconsistency suggested something troubling. Someone may have tried to clean the scene after the attack. If that was true, then the person responsible had not acted in blind panic. They had taken time to remove restraints, to move the victim onto the bed, and possibly to wipe away traces of blood before leaving the apartment, which raised a disturbing question. If this had been a robbery or a random break-in, why would the attacker bother to clean the scene? As investigators continued searching the apartment, another discovery deepened the mystery. On the kitchen shelf, there was an empty space where a large metal frying pan should have been. Only the glass lid remained. For a moment, it seemed like a minor detail. But given the nature of Xiao Ding's injuries, the possibility quickly emerged that the missing pan might have been the murder weapon. If that was the case, then whoever committed the crime had taken it with them. And if the weapon had been removed intentionally, then the killer likely knew the apartment well enough to move around inside without drawing attention, which meant the person responsible might not have been a stranger at all. Somewhere outside, the rain continued to fall across the streets of Chifeng, washing over the sidewalks and draining quietly into the gutters. In the hours that followed, investigators would begin reconstructing the events that led to Xiao Ding's death. They would examine surveillance footage, interview neighbors, and trace the smallest clues left behind. But at that moment, standing inside the dimly lit apartment, one thing was already clear. This crime had not happened by accident. Someone had come here with a purpose. And somewhere along the quiet roads outside the building, the first piece of that answer had already been thrown away. Torn into fragments and scattered along the roadside, waiting for investigators to find it. In the early hours following the discovery, investigators began piecing together the life of the young girl whose quiet bedroom had suddenly become the center of a homicide investigation. Her name was Xiao Ding. She was 13 years old, a middle school student who, by all outward appearances, lived a life that was remarkably ordinary. Teachers later described her as cheerful and talkative, the kind of student who blended easily into the rhythm of school life. She participated in class, completed her assignments on time, and maintained friendly relationships with her classmates. Nothing in her academic record suggested trouble, and nothing in her behavior hinted at conflict. For the people who knew her in that environment, Xiao Ding was simply another young teenager navigating school, friendships, and the small milestones of adolescence. But outside the classroom, her family story was far more complicated. Several years earlier, Xiao Ding's biological father had died in a car accident. The sudden loss had left her mother, Liu Yan, raising two daughters on her own. In the beginning, the family's situation was fragile but manageable. Liu Yan worked long hours at a local supermarket, and her older daughter took a job at a nearby restaurant to help support the household. Their apartment in Yinchuan district was small, but it provided enough space for the three of them to live quietly together. For a while, life seemed to settle into a routine. Yet over time, the absence of a stable partner in Liu Yan's life began to shape the direction of the household in ways that investigators would later consider significant. After the death of her first husband, Liu Yan eventually remarried. The second marriage, however, quickly became troubled. According to family accounts, the man she married, Li Peng, had a reputation for volatile behavior. When he drank, arguments often followed, and those arguments sometimes escalated into violence. Witnesses later confirmed that both Liu Yan and her daughters had endured periods of intimidation and abuse during that relationship. The marriage lasted less than a year before Liu Yan finally made the decision to divorce him, hoping to remove her children from what had become an increasingly hostile environment. For a brief period after that separation, the household returned to a quieter state. Liu Yan focused on her job and raising the two girls. But not long afterward, another relationship began to form. This time, the man entered her life through social media. His name was Wang Bang. At first, their interactions seemed harmless enough. They chatted online, exchanged messages, and eventually arranged to meet in person. Wang Bang presented himself as sociable and attentive, someone who appeared genuinely interested in helping Liu Yan rebuild a sense of stability. For a single mother struggling to support two daughters alone, the possibility of companionship may have felt like a chance to restore some normalcy to the household. Within a relatively short time, the relationship became serious. Liu Yan and Wang Bang married, and for a while it appeared as though the family might finally have found a more stable future. But beneath the surface, the situation was far more complicated than it seemed. Wang Bang's family had strongly opposed the marriage from the beginning. According to later statements, his parents believed Liu Yan was not an appropriate partner for their son. She was older than him, had already been married twice, and was raising two children who were not biologically related to Wang Bang. These factors created tension almost immediately. Even before the wedding, discussions about property, finances, and expectations for future children had begun to strain the relationship. One issue in particular would become a recurring point of conflict: the expectation that Liu Yan should give birth to a son. Wang Bang's family believed that continuing the family line was essential. When months passed without Liu Yan becoming pregnant, suspicion began to grow within the household. Some family members believed she might be intentionally avoiding pregnancy, perhaps using contraception without telling them. Whether those accusations had any basis in reality remained unclear, but the emotional damage they caused was very real. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere gradually shifted. Arguments between Liu Yan and Wang Bang became more frequent. The pressure from his family combined with his own frustrations created a growing sense of resentment. For Xiao Ding and her older sister, the tension was difficult to ignore. Witnesses later recalled that Xiao Ding had become noticeably quieter during this period. The girl who had once been outgoing at home seemed increasingly cautious around her stepfather, careful not to provoke arguments that might erupt without warning. At one point, a seemingly small incident revealed just how fragile the household had become. During dinner one evening, Xiao Ding casually mentioned that she would like to keep a kitten as a pet. It was the kind of request many children make without much thought. But Wang Bang reacted with immediate anger. According to later testimony, he raised his voice and scolded the girl harshly, accusing her of creating unnecessary burdens in the household. The confrontation left Xiao Ding visibly frightened, and it forced Liu Yan to confront a painful realization. The family environment she had hoped would provide stability for her daughters was beginning to resemble the same instability she had tried to escape before. Eventually, the marriage collapsed. After months of tension and conflict, Liu Yan made the decision to divorce Wang Bang. The separation was finalized in March of 2022, just a few months before Xiao Ding's death. In many cases, divorce creates distance between former partners. But in this situation, the connection between Liu Yan and Wang Bang did not end as cleanly as the paperwork might suggest. Even after the divorce, Wang Bang continued to visit the apartment. He occasionally brought groceries or household supplies, presenting himself as someone who still cared about Liu Yan and her daughters. From an outside perspective, the arrangement may have appeared amicable, even cooperative. For Liu Yan, who had already endured the instability of multiple relationships, maintaining a civil connection with her former husband may have seemed like the most practical option. But investigators would later discover that the emotional separation between them had not occurred in the same way for Wang Bang. While Liu Yan attempted to move forward with her life, Wang Bang remained deeply attached to the relationship that had ended. His visits to the apartment were not simply acts of kindness. Beneath that outward appearance, a quieter pattern of behavior had already begun to take shape, one that would only become visible after the investigation started digging deeper. The first warning sign, however, appeared in a place that initially seemed unrelated to the family's internal conflicts. About a month before the murder, Xiao Ding returned home from school one afternoon in a state of visible fear. Instead of unlocking the apartment door as usual, she ran into a neighbor's home across the hallway and asked to borrow a phone. When she called her mother, her voice was trembling. She told Liu Yan that someone had followed her all the way from the school gate. According to Xiao Ding, The man had been walking several meters behind her the entire time. He wore a baseball cap and a dark mask, keeping enough distance that she couldn't clearly see his face. When she tried taking a shortcut to confirm whether he was truly following her, the man adjusted his path and continued walking behind her. The behavior had frightened her enough that she refused to enter the apartment building alone. When Liu Yan heard the story, she initially treated it as a concerning but isolated incident. She reassured her daughter and promised to be more careful. But because the man never approached Xiaoding directly, and the situation did not repeat itself in the following days, the family gradually allowed the memory of that encounter to fade. No report was filed with the police, no cameras were checked, and no one realized that the man Xiaoding had described might not have been a stranger at all. By the time investigators returned to that moment weeks later, the quiet warning it contained would appear far more significant than anyone had initially believed. As investigators continued reconstructing the final hours of Xiaoding's life, they quickly realized that understanding the timeline of that afternoon would be critical. The apartment itself had offered only limited clues. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, and no evidence that an unfamiliar intruder had forced their way inside. Whoever entered the apartment had likely done so without resistance, which meant the key question was simple, but deeply troubling. Who had Xiaoding willingly opened the door for? Police began by reviewing surveillance cameras installed around the residential complex. Like many older apartment neighborhoods in smaller Chinese cities, the building did not have modern security infrastructure. The entrance camera captured only a narrow view of the gate and part of the walkway. It was far from perfect, but it was still the best starting point investigators had. Footage from that afternoon showed Xiaoding returning home from school at approximately 4 p.m. She appeared alone, carrying her backpack and walking at a relaxed pace. Nothing about her behavior suggested fear or urgency. She unlocked the door to the apartment building and disappeared inside. That was the last confirmed moment she was seen alive on camera. Roughly 30 minutes later, another figure appeared on the surveillance footage approaching the building. The man wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Because of the rain and the low camera resolution, identifying details were difficult to see clearly, but investigators immediately noticed something unusual. The man did not hesitate when he reached the entrance. He walked directly to the building and entered without knocking on any neighboring doors or looking around for directions. His movements suggested familiarity with the location, as if he had visited the building many times before. At first glance, the footage might not have seemed suspicious. Many residents and visitors pass through the same entrance every day. But when police examined the video frame by frame, one detail began to stand out. The man's posture and body language looked strikingly familiar. Later that evening, officers asked Liu Yan and her older daughter to watch the footage. When the figure appeared on the screen, the two women immediately exchanged uneasy glances. They both believed they recognized him. The person walking into the building that afternoon looked very much like Wang Bang. For investigators, this possibility instantly shifted the direction of the case. Until that moment, Wang Bang had been treated as a grieving former family member who had helped report the crime. He had been cooperative, calm, and seemingly shocked by the news of Xiaoding's death. But the surveillance footage suggested he might have been present at the apartment shortly before the estimated time of the murder. When officers contacted Wang Bang again later that night, his initial explanation was simple. He confirmed that he had indeed visited the apartment building that afternoon. According to him, he had come to drop off some groceries for Liu Yan, something he had done many times before. But when he arrived and found that no one answered the door, he claimed he left shortly afterward. At first, the story sounded plausible, yet the timeline quickly raised doubts. The medical examiner had estimated that Xiaoding died between 4:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. If Wang Bang entered the building around 4:30, then he would have arrived during the exact window when the attack was believed to have taken place. Investigators asked him an obvious follow-up question. Why hadn't he mentioned visiting the apartment earlier when Liu Yan first called him? For a moment, Wang Bang hesitated. Then he offered a new explanation. He said he had forgotten to mention it in the confusion of the moment. Hearing that Xiaoding had been found injured had shocked him so deeply that he hadn't been thinking clearly. It was an answer that technically filled the gap, but it did little to ease the growing suspicion among the investigators. As the questioning continued, another inconsistency surfaced. Earlier that day, Wang Bang had been seen near Xiaoding's school. This information came from a street vendor who operated a small snack stall across from the school gate. When police showed him a photo of Wang Bang, the man nodded almost immediately. He remembered seeing him standing near the entrance during the afternoon dismissal period, watching the students as they left the campus. According to the vendor, Wang Bang had remained there for several minutes before eventually walking away. That detail aligned disturbingly well with the story Xiaoding had told her mother weeks earlier. The one about a man following her home while wearing a cap and mask. If the two events were connected, then it suggested something far more deliberate than a random act of violence. It suggested surveillance. Someone may have been watching Xiaoding's routine, learning the exact time she returned home from school and confirming when she was likely to be alone in the apartment. As investigators reviewed more footage from nearby streets, the pattern began to grow clearer. One camera, located 2 blocks from the apartment building, captured a man matching Wang Bang's description, walking along the sidewalk earlier that afternoon. In the video, he appeared to be carrying something in his hand, a folded plastic bag that seemed heavy enough to contain a solid object. But when he exited the building later, the bag was no longer visible. At that stage of the investigation, the significance of the missing bag remained uncertain. But when detectives returned to the apartment and re-examined the empty space on the kitchen shelf where the frying pan should have been, a troubling theory began to form. What if Wang Bang had taken the pan with him after leaving the apartment? If the pan had been used as the weapon, removing it from the scene would have eliminated the most direct piece of physical evidence linking him to the attack. Still, suspicion alone was not enough. Investigators needed proof. The breakthrough came the following morning, when a sanitation worker cleaning the roadside about 3 kilometers from the apartment complex made an unusual discovery. Scattered along the edge of the pavement were dozens of small paper fragments, torn into irregular shapes and partially soaked by rainwater. At first glance, the pieces looked like ordinary trash, but when the worker noticed that several fragments contained printed text, curiosity led him to gather them together and bring them to a nearby police station. What he handed over would soon become one of the most important clues in the entire investigation. The fragments, once carefully dried and reassembled by forensic technicians, revealed portions of a handwritten note. And although much of the paper had been destroyed, a few sentences remained disturbingly clear. Inside the forensic laboratory, technicians carefully laid the damp paper fragments across a long stainless steel table. Each piece had to be dried slowly before it could be examined, because the rainwater had already begun dissolving some of the ink. What initially looked like meaningless scraps gradually started to resemble parts of a single sheet of paper. The fragments were uneven, many no larger than a fingernail. Some were jagged along the edges, suggesting the paper had been torn quickly and without care. Others contained partial strokes of handwriting. A curved line here, the tail of a character there, too incomplete to understand on their own. Reconstructing the original message would take patience. For several hours, forensic technicians worked like puzzle solvers, shifting pieces back and forth beneath bright lamps. Whenever 2 edges aligned perfectly, a small strip of transparent film was placed over them to hold them together. Slowly, letter by letter, fragments of sentences began to appear. What emerged from the reconstructed page was disturbing. The note appeared to be written in a mixture of frustration and bitterness. Some lines were still incomplete, but several phrases could be read clearly enough to understand the writer's emotional state. One section read, "You destroyed everything I had." Another fragment contained the words, "You will regret what you did to me." A third sentence, written more heavily than the others, as if the writer had pressed the pen harder against the paper, seemed to say, "No one will stop me this time." The message did not directly mention Xiaoding, nor did it explicitly describe violence, but the tone was unmistakably hostile. Whoever wrote the note was deeply angry at someone they believed had betrayed them. More importantly, investigators believed the note had been written shortly before the murder. The rain that night had scattered the fragments along the roadside, but the pieces had not been completely soaked. That suggested they had been thrown away only a few hours earlier, likely sometime after the crime had already taken place. Police immediately began comparing the handwriting on the fragments with known samples from individuals connected to the case. The results arrived later that evening. According to the forensic handwriting analysts, several distinctive features in the characters. The angle of certain strokes, The spacing between words and the pressure patterns in the ink closely matched handwriting samples taken from Wang Bang. The match was not yet considered absolute proof, but the similarities were strong enough to raise serious suspicion. For investigators, the discovery marked a turning point. Until then, the case against Wang Bang had been largely circumstantial. Surveillance footage placing him near the apartment, witness accounts placing him near the school, and inconsistencies in his explanation of events. But the torn note suggested something far more troubling. It hinted at motive. If the message had indeed been written by Wang Bang, then the anger expressed in those lines might have been directed toward Liu Yan, the woman who had divorced him only months earlier. But this raised another question. If his anger was directed at Liu Yan, why was Xiao Ding the victim? As detectives began reviewing Wang Bang's past behavior more closely, they started uncovering details that painted a darker picture of his emotional state after the divorce. Friends and acquaintances later reported that Wang Bang had struggled to accept the separation. In private conversations, he often complained that Liu Yan had used him and then abandoned him. He believed he had invested money, time, and effort into the marriage, only to be left with nothing when it ended. Some witnesses even recalled hearing him say something unsettling. According to one co-worker, Wang Bang had once remarked that Liu Yan would eventually pay for what she did. At the time, the comment had sounded like little more than a bitter complaint after a failed marriage. But now, in the context of a homicide investigation, those words carried a far more ominous meaning. Meanwhile, forensic investigators continued searching the apartment for additional clues. The mop near the entrance, the one that had initially seemed out of place, was carefully examined under specialized lighting. Even though the floor had been partially cleaned, traces of diluted blood were still visible in several areas, especially near the bedroom doorway. This confirmed the earlier suspicion. Someone had attempted to wipe away evidence after the attack, but the cleaning had not been thorough enough to eliminate all traces. In fact, the pattern of diluted bloodstains suggested that the body had originally been attacked near the bedroom entrance before being moved onto the bed. This detail revealed something important about the sequence of events. The attack had likely begun suddenly, catching Xiao Ding off guard. She may have been standing or walking toward the bedroom when the first blow was delivered. After she collapsed, the attacker continued striking her multiple times before eventually dragging or lifting her onto the bed. Another small but crucial detail soon emerged. During the examination of Xiao Ding's wrists and ankles, forensic experts had noticed the bruising patterns left behind by the restraints that had once been tied around them. The marks were narrow and deeply compressed, suggesting the use of something thin but strong, possibly nylon cord or plastic packaging rope. But despite an extensive search of the apartment, no such material could be found. Whoever committed the crime had removed not only the weapon, but also the restraints. This level of awareness suggested planning. It meant the killer had either brought those materials with them or had deliberately removed them afterward to prevent investigators from tracing them back to their source. Meanwhile, detectives returned to the surveillance footage once again, focusing on the moment Wang Bang exited the apartment building. When he first entered earlier that afternoon, his jacket appeared dry despite the rain. But when he left the building roughly 20 minutes later, several dark stains were visible along the lower sleeve. At first glance, they might have been rainwater, but the pattern looked unusual, thicker, darker, and concentrated near the cuff. If those stains were blood, it would mean Wang Bang had left the building immediately after the attack, before he had a chance to fully clean himself. Still, without the weapon or the restraints, the evidence remained incomplete. Investigators needed something more concrete to prove that Wang Bang had not only been present, but had also committed the crime. That final piece of evidence would come from a place few people initially considered important: Wang Bang's own mobile phone. Because in the digital records stored inside that device, investigators would soon discover a pattern of movements that told a very different story than the one he had been telling them. When investigators obtained access to Wang Bang's mobile phone records, they expected to confirm only the basic timeline of his movements on the day of the murder. Modern smartphones store a surprising amount of location data, not only through GPS but also through connections to nearby cellular towers and wireless networks. Even when a person does not actively use navigation apps, Their phone quietly records fragments of their daily travel. In many criminal investigations, this digital trail becomes one of the most reliable witnesses. At first, Wang Bang appeared confident when officers mentioned examining his phone. He had already explained that he briefly visited the apartment building that afternoon, and he believed the data would simply confirm that limited visit. According to his statement, he arrived at the building, knocked on the door, received no response, and left shortly afterward. But when forensic analysts began reconstructing the phone's movement history, the timeline they discovered did not align with that explanation. The first significant entry appeared shortly after 3:30 p.m. At that time, Wang Bang's phone connected to a cellular tower located less than 200 meters from Xiaoding's middle school. That detail alone might not have meant much. The school sat near a busy intersection, and many people passed through the area every day, but the data showed that his phone remained connected to that tower for nearly 15 minutes. This matched the statement from the street vendor who had seen Wang Bang standing near the school gate during dismissal. At approximately 3:50 p.m., the phone began moving slowly along a path that mirrored the route Xiaoding typically took when walking home from school. Several network handoffs between nearby towers showed the device traveling steadily through the same residential streets that Xiaoding had crossed only minutes earlier. In other words, the digital records supported the possibility that Wang Bang had followed her. By 4:20 p.m., the phone connected to a tower closest to the apartment complex in Yinchuan district. From that point onward, the device remained within that coverage zone for almost 30 minutes, far longer than the brief visit Wang Bang had originally described. During this same window of time, Xiaoding's estimated time of death fell between 4:30 and 5 p.m. But the most revealing data point appeared later in the evening. At around 7:10 p.m., Wang Bang's phone began moving again, traveling several kilometers away from the apartment complex toward a quiet road on the outskirts of the district. The location corresponded almost exactly with the place where the sanitation worker had discovered the torn fragments of the handwritten note earlier that morning. The phone remained in that area for approximately 6 minutes before returning toward the city center. This movement raised an obvious question. If Wang Bang had simply gone home after his visit to the apartment, why had he traveled to that remote roadside location hours later? When detectives confronted him with the phone records, his confidence began to fade. At first, he tried to maintain his original story. He insisted that he had only gone to the apartment to deliver groceries and had left shortly afterward. As for the roadside location, he claimed he had been driving around aimlessly to clear his mind after hearing the tragic news about Xiaoding. But investigators now had multiple pieces of evidence that contradicted him. Surveillance footage placing him near the apartment during the critical time window. Witnesses seeing him near the school earlier that afternoon. The torn note fragments matching his handwriting, and now the phone data linking him to the roadside location where those fragments had been discarded. Under the weight of this growing evidence, Wang Bang's explanation began to unravel. The interrogation lasted several hours. At first, his answers became shorter, more cautious. He repeated the same phrases again and again, insisting that he had nothing to do with the girl's death. But detectives continued presenting each new piece of evidence in careful sequence, forcing him to confront the inconsistencies one by one. Eventually, the silence between questions began to stretch longer. Then, sometime after midnight, Wang Bang finally lowered his head and spoke quietly. What he said next changed the entire tone of the investigation. He admitted that he had gone to the apartment that afternoon not to deliver groceries, but to confront Liu Yan. According to his statement, he had been increasingly angry since the divorce. He believed Liu Yan had treated him unfairly, taking advantage of him financially before ending the marriage. In the weeks leading up to the murder, he had repeatedly tried to contact her, hoping to persuade her to reconcile. But Liu Yan had refused. On the day of the crime, Wang Bang claimed he had gone to the apartment intending to speak with her face-to-face. When he arrived, however, Liu Yan was still at work. The only person home was Xiaoding. At first, the conversation between them had been brief and tense. Xiaoding had reportedly told him that her mother was not there and that he should leave. But Wang Bang insisted on entering the apartment to wait for Liu Yan's return. When the girl tried to stop him, the argument escalated. According to his confession, the situation spiraled out of control. He admitted that he had grabbed Xiaoding and tied her wrists and ankles with plastic rope he had brought with him. His intention, he claimed, was to force Liu Yan to return home so they could talk. But Xiaoding struggled and shouted. In that moment, he said, panic and anger overwhelmed him. He struck her with a metal frying pan from the kitchen. Once, then again, and again. By the time he realized what he had done, Xiaoding was no longer moving. The apartment fell silent. For several minutes, Wangbang simply stood there, staring at the girl's body, trying to process the irreversible consequences of what had just happened. Then fear took over. He removed the plastic restraints, wiped parts of the floor with the mop near the entrance, and carried the frying pan out of the apartment with him. Later that evening, he threw the weapon into a drainage canal several kilometers away before tearing up the note he had written earlier and scattering its pieces along the roadside. When detectives heard the full confession, the pieces of the investigation finally aligned. The surveillance footage, the torn note, the phone records, the missing frying pan. All of it pointed to the same conclusion. But even after Wangbang admitted what he had done, one haunting question remained. Why had he written that note before the crime even happened? Because the message suggested something far more disturbing than a sudden burst of anger. It suggested that, long before he stepped into that apartment, the idea of revenge had already begun forming in his mind. After Wangbang's confession, investigators began retracing the final pieces of the case to confirm every detail he had described. In homicide investigations, a confession alone is never considered enough. Detectives must verify that the suspect's statement aligns with physical evidence, forensic findings, and the broader timeline of events. Only when every piece fits together can the case be considered complete. The first priority was locating the missing murder weapon. According to Wangbang's statement, after leaving the apartment, he had driven several kilometers away and thrown the metal frying pan into a roadside drainage canal. The location he described was not far from where the sanitation worker had discovered the torn fragments of the handwritten note. Investigators suspected he had stopped there twice that evening, once to dispose of the weapon, and later again to scatter the shredded paper. The following morning, a search team arrived at the canal. The drainage channel ran parallel to a narrow rural road, carrying murky water toward a larger irrigation ditch outside the district. The water level was shallow, but thick layers of mud and debris had accumulated along the bottom. Officers used long metal poles to probe the sediment, while others carefully searched along the edges of the channel. After nearly 2 hours of searching, one of the poles struck something solid beneath the mud. When the object was lifted from the water, the shape was immediately recognizable. It was a large metal frying pan. The surface was coated with dirt and rust-colored stains that had darkened in the water. Even before laboratory testing, investigators already suspected they had recovered the weapon described in Wangbang's confession. Forensic analysis later confirmed that traces of blood matching Xiaoding's DNA were still present along the rim and interior surface of the pan. With that discovery, the final physical link between Wangbang and the murder had been established. Meanwhile, investigators revisited the apartment one last time, reconstructing the sequence of events using both the confession and the forensic evidence collected from the scene. The attack had likely begun near the bedroom doorway, exactly where diluted blood traces had been found beneath the clean floor surface. From there, Xiaoding had collapsed before being struck repeatedly with the pan. Afterward, Wangbang had removed the plastic rope he used to restrain her, wiped sections of the floor, and placed the girl's body onto the bed, possibly in an attempt to make the scene appear less chaotic. But despite those efforts, the evidence he left behind had been enough for investigators to uncover the truth. As the case moved toward prosecution, the motive became clearer. Wangbang's resentment toward Liu Yan had grown steadily after their divorce. Friends later told investigators that he often spoke about feeling humiliated and betrayed by the end of the marriage. He believed he had sacrificed money and effort for the relationship, only to be discarded once Liu Yan no longer needed him. Over time, that bitterness transformed into anger. The handwritten note he had torn apart revealed just how deeply those feelings had developed. In it, he blamed Liu Yan for ruining his life and wrote that she would eventually pay for what she had done. But on the afternoon he arrived at the apartment, Liu Yan was not there. Instead, the only person inside was a 13-year-old girl who had nothing to do with the conflict between the adults around her. When Wangbang attacked Xiaoding, the act was not part of some carefully planned strategy. It was the violent collapse of a mind consumed by resentment and desperation. The child simply happened to be the one standing in front of him when that anger finally exploded. For the community in Chifeng, the case quickly became a source of shock and grief. Residents of the small apartment complex struggled to accept that such a brutal crime had taken place in a place that had always felt ordinary and safe. Neighbors later described Xiao Ding as a polite and cheerful girl who often greeted people in the hallway when returning from school. The idea that someone once trusted by the family could be responsible for her death was difficult for many to understand. During the trial that followed, prosecutors presented the full chain of evidence. The surveillance footage showing Wang Bang entering the building, the witness testimony placing him near the school, the reconstructed fragments of the threatening note, the mobile phone location records tracing his movements, and finally the recovered frying pan carrying the victim's DNA. Together, those elements formed a complete narrative of the crime. The court ultimately found Wang Bang guilty of intentional homicide. Given the brutality of the attack and the age of the victim, the sentence handed down was severe. The judgment reflected not only the violence of the act itself, but also the profound impact the crime had on the victim's family and the wider community. For Liu Yan, the consequences were devastating. In the span of just a few years, she had lost her first husband in an accident and later her young daughter to a violent crime committed by someone she had once trusted enough to marry. The quiet apartment in Yinchuan district would never feel the same again, and the scattered fragments of paper once found along a rain-soaked roadside remained a haunting reminder of how long resentment can quietly grow inside a person before finally turning into irreversible tragedy.